falls into the murderous clutches of ISIS or others, national security here in America and for Americans abroad will never be the same. And while there may be a suspect in custody over the Benghazi bombing, there is no reason to feel completely safe. These issues and more as we welcome in the Executive Director of the National Security Network, John Bradshaw, joins us on Midpoint. John, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
John, here we go. Let's get started with Benghazi first, because now we have a suspect in custody, but this is just one. Now, there are those who will say that this has just got to be the tip of the iceberg, but I also have to ask, how much do we really think this guy is going to tell us?
Well, first of all, I think the capture of this suspect, Katala, is something that all Americans can be very happy about. It has been a long time coming, but it was worth the wait. It was a very patiently planned operation to make sure that no U.S. personnel were put at risk and that we were able to capture him and hopefully get some intelligence value out of him. We don't know yet how much value there will be. Of course, the attacks on Benghazi happened almost 2 years ago. There are reports, and the administration has said that he has been plotting additional attacks against the United States since that time. So finding out about those plots is something that the high-value interrogation team is doing right now. They will interrogate him under the public safety exception to the Miranda rule. They don't need to advise him that he can remain silent. There's no indication that he has been given his Miranda rights. So there should be some intelligence value out of it. And then hopefully when he's brought here to the United States for a trial, some further information will come out. Some of it will have to be done, of course, in a classified setting that will help us understand what really happened with the Benghazi incident, the Benghazi tragedy of a couple of years ago.
John, from an investigative standpoint and from a security standpoint, could you sort of reconcile the two sides of this argument? One that says, why did it take so long? He was sitting in public, he was in full view, he had done network television interviews from time to time. But then we do still need to balance that by you need to do all of your due diligence in order to make sure that when you get this guy, that you actually have him, that you don't miss the first time. Could you put those two together for us?
Right. Well, of course, some say we should have gone in sooner. We could have gone in there with guns blazing into his compound and maybe killed him, maybe had some of our personnel killed, Libyan civilians who had nothing to do with it. So it was smart to be patient. They carefully reconstructed a mock-up of his compound with cracked there, so everyone was very familiar with it. They were able to pull it off apparently without a hitch, without any shot being fired. We don't know all the details yet, but I think it was a good balance, waiting and being patient and using the right kind of military intelligence planning to get this thing right. And as you mentioned earlier, there are other suspects still there, but I think we should use the same approach of making sure we get them and we know who we have, and also the longer the time that's done planning these operations, we're also at the same time gathering evidence that will be used in the trial against him. So if you'd gone in sooner, you'd have all these operational risks, but you also might not have the evidence that you need to convict this guy.
From that security standpoint again, and from your knowledge, as we look at one guy that is now in custody and potentially and hopefully more, is there a sense in the intelligence community of how big a cell or how big a group this could be, or where the backing is coming from, or if this is indeed one guy with a small group of people who simply decided to take action? It always seems to me there's got to be something more behind it.
Well, as we know, he really has no direct connection to core Al-Qaeda, which is the entity that perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, and which we have been at war with under the authorization for the use of military force that was passed in 2001. He has no connection to that. The reports that I've seen, and a lot of this still needs to come out in the coming days and weeks, but he had a fairly small group, maybe a couple of dozen fighters who were directly connected to him at the time of the Benghazi attack, although he did apparently serve as a ringleader and instigator to make that attack continue and to rally others beyond his small group to participate in that attack. So again, I don't think we know exactly how large his group was and what the connections were, but at this time it seems that he was not really the leader of a particularly large terrorist cell.
Let's spin to Iraq then now and what's happening there. Of course, it changes every single day. Baghdad is still under siege, and there is still a thinking process that they may fall. Now, we've had some security folks here tell us that they simply don't see Baghdad falling simply because of the effort that it will take and the forces that are gathered in Baghdad. What's your opinion?
Well, I agree with that. I think it's very unlikely that Baghdad will fall. What you saw in Mosul and some of the other cities was that the Sunni population and even the Sunni members of the military just willingly surrendered, gave up. Some of the military members took off their uniforms, laid down their weapons. They did not want to fight in any way for the Maliki regime. They don't view it as a legitimate regime. They've been oppressed by that regime, the Sunnis in that area in the Sunni triangle. So you're going to see a very different thing when these Sunni militias, jihadist insurgents that make up ISIS, along with other groups that are aligned with them, former Baathists as well. The Shiite defenders of Baghdad are going to be a much tougher fight for them than they saw in Mosul and other places that were Sunni dominated.
Are we looking at a time and an instance here where if indeed ISIS and their factions get together, they create this state, if you will, or at least this pseudo-state that will be created across different countries here, that as they consolidate, they already have a lot of money, they already have very good planning at this point, but where we are right now to where we might go, let's say, in a year, it just bodes ill for, and I hate to be so hyperbolic here, but for the world itself, certainly for American security in the region, but putting all these factions together and letting them all have a place where they can sit and germinate and work together and get ready, undoubtedly, as many people feel, to eventually launch attacks against America.
It's clearly a very dangerous situation for the region. The threats to the region are very clear and immediate. And as you say, there are potentially longer-term threats to the United States. Right now, these guys are in the middle of a continuing firefight, and actually have two fronts. They have a front in Syria and Iraq that they are fighting on. So it's unlikely that their main focus right now will be attacks on America. That could happen down the road, as you suggest. Right now, it's a regional problem. I think the United States, more than anything else, needs to be working diplomatically with those regional partners who share our interest in not seeing this ISIS statelet really establish itself as a long-term threat to the region. So all the countries in the region, Turkey, Jordan, others, even Iran, share some of our interests. Our interests are not identical, but we have some shared interests, and we should be working with those countries very vigorously, diplomatically, to try to isolate ISIS and contain, and then hopefully roll back that and eliminate that threat. And as I say, again, right now, it's much more of a threat to the region.
John, a couple of minutes that we have left here. There is an article today, actually an opinion piece written in the Wall Street Journal, written by Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. It is called The Collapsing Obama Doctrine. The subtitle is Rarely Has a U.S. President Been So Wrong About So Much at the Expense of So Many. And one of the lead lines here is, rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many. I wanted to get your take on this.
Well, I think it's clear, and President Obama has admitted sometimes he's made mistakes, but I think he has a long way to go to ever challenge Dick Cheney for making colossal blunders like he made back in 2003. Bush and Cheney invaded Iraq with the idea that they would, first of all, find weapons of mass destruction, which we know now was not true, and even the intelligence at the time was pretty clear that that wasn't the case. He wanted to establish a democratic Iraq that would be a beacon for the rest of the Middle East, and that certainly hasn't happened. The Bush administration was in charge of that country for a long time, and then ceded it over to the Obama administration before the pullout of troops in 2011. But I think that that mistake, that original mistake, which is coming home to roost now in Iraq, is really on Cheney and President Bush much more than President Obama.
Is it now at the point where President Obama simply doesn't have many options left, because now he's even reconsidering the opportunity for airstrikes? So it makes you wonder what's next, and many people certainly hope it is not working with Iran.
Well, the possibility of airstrikes or drone strikes, unmanned drone strikes, is something that needs to be kept on the table, and the administration has said that. That should be kept on the table as a last resort if it looks like Baghdad might fall. And even in that case, the operational risks and the need for good intelligence are very difficult in that situation. So we have to be cautious that we don't go in. A lot of these ISIS command and control nodes are embedded in the population, so they're very difficult to strike at without killing civilians who have nothing to do with this fight. And so if we can find a way to have targeted strikes that actually would have a positive impact and would not cause more damage or would not make the situation worse, that's something that should be considered. But we're not there yet. I think the diplomatic approach that I mentioned earlier is where the administration needs to be focusing its attention, and I believe that's what they're doing right now.
It will be interesting to see what happens next. John Bradshaw, thank you so much for joining us, sir. We'll talk again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, now on social media every day here on Midpoint and on the Newsmax network, we ask your opinions. Now that there has been an arrest, or at least a capture in the Benghazi case, satisfied? Want more? And, of course, talk about your safety, because here we question everything.